Welcome back to the deep dive. We are pulling up a stack of source material today that is, well, I think it's going to fundamentally change how you view one of the biggest strategic threats in cybersecurity.
It really should.
For years, the narrative around quantum computing has been, it's a future problem, something we can worry about, maybe 5 or 10 years down the road when the hardware is actually ready.
And that conventional wisdom is not just outdated, it's dangerously outdated. Our sources today, and we're looking at some deep dives into texts like cracking the quantum code, immediate cryptographic vulnerabilities, that they deliver a really blunt message.
Which is?
That the quantum cybersecurity threat is not a distant concern at all. It is an immediate, right now vulnerability that organizations handling high-value data have to address today.
And we're talking about everyone from Fortune 500s to, say, NATO governments and even private banks.
Exactly. The highest stakes players.
Okay, so let's unpack this right away. We're not talking about some far-off threat. You're saying there are immediate, practical exploits possible right now.
That's the mission of this deep dive, to dissect how current cyber infrastructures are already vulnerable. We need to shift the focus away from the science fiction of a future quantum machine and onto the current preparatory attack phase.
The preparatory attack phase. Okay.
Yeah, that's the crucial shift in thinking. The core paradox is this. Even if a fault-tolerant quantum computer, the kind that can run Shor's algorithm on commercial-grade keys, even if it doesn't exist yet, the clock on your encrypted data may have already run out.
How is that possible?
Because the most important phase of the attack is happening now. It's the mass collection of encrypted data.
Yeah.
It's a strategy we call harvest now, decrypt later.
This insight is, it's immediately relevant to anyone dealing with high-stakes long-term security. If you are a learner, if you're trying to get the true picture of enterprise-level security, this is your shortcut.
It is. You need to understand that delaying a migration to quantum-resistant cryptography, it's functionally the same as just handing your adversary the keys to your entire archive. And that really leads to this simple guiding principle we see throughout the source material. Your data is the world. Protect it.
Simple but powerful.
It has to be. If that data has strategic, financial, or national security value that lasts longer than the predicted timeline for quantum capability, its protection has to be absolute. Future-proof.
Any vulnerability in its design today then reduces what? The whole system's assurance level to zero.
To zero, that's right.
Here's where we kick off the conversation then. We have to fully internalize this timeline shift. So let's jump straight into section 1 and explore why this threat is so immediate.
Let's do it.
So the conventional view is pretty comforting. We think of quantum computers as these incredibly delicate, expensive machines that need cryogenic temperatures. They're lab toys, right?
That's the perception.
General Tech News tells us we have years, maybe even a decade, before a true Q day arrives.
Oh.
But the sources are so insistent. Current cyber infrastructures are already vulnerable. So if the machine doesn't exist, where's the vulnerability actually coming from?
The vulnerability stems entirely from an inherent weakness in the mathematics of the encryption standards we use globally today.
The math itself.
The math itself.
Yeah.
When a threat actor commits to the harvest now, decrypt later strategy, they are betting on a future mathematical certainty. The weakness exists because the data you encrypt today with traditional methods, we're talking specifically about asymmetric cryptography like RSA and ECC, is vulnerable to retroactive decryption.
So let me get this straight. The encryption isn't broken today, but the keys protecting that encryption are mathematically guaranteed to be breakable in the future.
Exactly. By an algorithm we already know everything about, Shor's algorithm.
Right.
The time it would take for a classical computer to, say, factor the large prime numbers in an RSA key, or solve the discrete logarithm problem for ECC.
Well,
we're talking astronomical timescales, functionally infinite.
Billions of years, I've read.
Correct. But Shor's algorithm, once you can run it on a sufficiently powerful, fault-tolerant quantum computer, it reduces those timescales to minutes, maybe hours.
That is a staggering reduction.
It's a complete paradigm shift. And the key insight here is that the threat actor doesn't need to break your key today. They just need to collect the encrypted data payload and the cryptographic parameters associated with it.
They're stockpiling secrets. They're just holding on to this data, this massive digital time capsule, until the moment Q day when the quantum capability is mature enough.
And then they simply retrieve the archive and retroactively decrypt everything they collected over the past 5, 10, maybe even 15 years.
So the exploit then, the immediate practical exploit possible today is the collection itself.
It's the successful execution of that preparatory phase, the mass collection and exfiltration of high-value, sensitive data. This is an intelligence gathering operation on a massive state-sponsored scale.
And this is so critical for our listeners in high-stakes environments. We're talking about the consistent, high-volume collection of mission-critical information.
Right. From large enterprises, military operational data, strategic state secrets from G7 and NATO governments.
Not to mention next-generation intellectual property, long-term financial plans from private banks.
The list goes on. The scale of the collection itself confirms how serious the threat actor's intent is.
Can you make that more concrete? Let's use an analogy.
Okay, so let's refine your time capsule idea. Imagine an organization signs a confidential 20-year non-disclosure agreement today. They lock the digital copy with a strong key, say RSA 4096.
Standard practice.
Standard practice.
Yeah.
We know for a fact that sophisticated state actors are intercepting and archiving this encrypted file right now. They're operating on the assumption that a capable quantum computer will arrive in, let's be conservative, 10 years.
Okay.
Well, the organization, therefore, has 10 years of immediate critical exposure. If that document needs to remain secret for 20 years, it is already compromised.
Because the security mechanism expires halfway through its required lifetime.
Precisely.
That really captures the gravity of it. And it forces a complete reevaluation of data security, not based on today's computers, but on the projected useful life of the data itself.
Correct. You have to ask, what information absolutely retains high value for 5, 10, 20 years? That forces this immediate response.
So what are some of those categories?
This is where we have to assess the data's half-life, or its duration of necessary secrecy. And the data that needs this long-term protection, it falls into very predictable categories.
Like what?
First, you have long-term strategic intelligence, military communications, signals intelligence, long-range strategic plans, blueprints for next-generation weapon systems. This information retains value for decades, well past any reasonable projection for Q-Day.
I see. And for the private sector?
Second, economic and intellectual property, pharmaceutical patents, proprietary manufacturing processes, algorithmic trading secrets, foundational AI source code. These are the assets that define the future competitive advantage of entire nations and corporations.
And what about the infrastructure of the internet itself?
That's the third category, identity and foundational trust architecture. We're talking about root certificates, key signing keys, and long-term security identifiers. If those are harvested today, the consequences aren't just data loss. It's the wholesale ability to impersonate critical infrastructure components years from now.
So if the data is essential for longer than the estimated quantum timeline, which for strategic data is almost always the case, it is already functionally unprotected by classical encryption.
It is, and this reality demands what our sources call the absolute minimization of unsolved variables.
Unsolved variables, explain that.
When you're building high-assurance systems, the kind used by military command or specialized financial institutions, you have to achieve a high epistemic certainty score, or ECS validation.
The ECS is basically your confidence level that the system will do its job flawlessly over its intended lifespan.
Exactly. And if your security architecture relies on an unverified assumption, like quantum capabilities won't mature for another 15 years, that unknown future timing introduces a massive uncertainty, a huge unsolved variable.
Which inherently lowers your confidence score, your ECS.
Drastically. It compromises the integrity of the whole system's assurance level. For sectors that cannot tolerate uncertainty like G7 or NATO infrastructure, they have to abandon security based on hope. They have to pivot to systems where the security model is proven resistant to future quantum capabilities. They need solutions that maximize that ECS right now.
That framing really underscores the strategic pressure. The time to act isn't driven by the quantum lab, it's driven by the required half-life of your most sensitive data.
And if an organization hasn't started its post-quantum migration, they are frankly passively facilitating the largest intelligence gathering operation in history.
Which brings us to the legacy systems themselves. This is what makes them such an Achilles heel. Understanding which systems are most exposed and why they fail is the next critical step.
Absolutely.
Let's get granular about these existing cryptographic weaknesses. We're not talking about, application layer security issues or software bugs. We are talking about something much more fundamental.
We're talking about mathematical vulnerabilities at the foundational layer of global security. What's being exploited specifically is the ubiquitously deployed asymmetric cryptography.
And that's used for what, primarily?
Two fundamental security functions: key exchange, which ensures confidential communication, and digital signatures, which ensure data integrity and authenticity.
The prime examples being the RSA algorithm and elliptic curve cryptography, ECC.
The two big ones, yes. RSA relies on the difficulty of factoring two very large prime numbers. ECC relies on the difficulty of solving the discrete logarithm problem over an elliptic curve. For classical computers, these problems are computationally intractable.
And that intractability is the only thing protecting the data.
The only thing. Shor's algorithm is the quantum hammer that shatters this protection. It reduces the computational complexity of these problems exponentially.
So where a classical supercomputer might take billions of years to break an RSA 2048 key,
A sufficiently powerful QC could potentially do it in a matter of hours. This is why the reliance on these legacy standards is the fundamental weakness being exploited by the harvesting threat actors today.
so the moment that quantum capability arrives, every private key protected by RSA or ECC ever recorded by an adversary essentially becomes public.
Instantly.
Given that, what is the enormous scope of exposure, especially across the high assurance systems our sources are so concerned with?
The scope is systemic. It's
Uh-huh.
almost total, because these algorithms underpin nearly all modern digital trust.
Let's break that down for the specific high-stakes sectors.
Okay, first, consider financial trading platforms and private bank security. These systems live and die by trust, integrity, and non-repudiation. They use asymmetric crypto for secure messaging, transaction validation, client authentication,
Everything.
everything. If the harvested keys are compromised years from now, an adversary could retroactively forge records. They could repudiate multi-million-dollar contracts or conduct massive delayed action fraud. The integrity of the historical financial ledger is completely destroyed.
So it's not just stealing today's money, it's undermining the certainty of transactions dating back years, that's the bedrock of financial stability.
Precisely. Next, think about military-grade infrastructure and secure comms. Key management in these environments is the foundation of national security.
So satellite communications, drone telemetry,
Classified messaging systems, weapons command codes, all of it is protected by these vulnerable keys. Harvesting this data means a future adversary gets access to years of strategic doctrine, deployment plans, and signals intelligence. It would give them an overwhelming strategic advantage.
and what about this push toward mission-critical zero trust development? That's supposed to be the new gold standard.
It is, but Zero Trust is an architectural model designed to verify identity and authorization at every single microsegment. If the digital signatures used to create that trust chain, the certificates verifying users, devices, code, if those are compromised, the entire model collapses,
It creates a massive loop.
a catastrophic one. If an attacker can forge the identity of a trusted internal component, they can bypass the entire verification process. They could potentially gain deeper, more unauthorized access than a brute force attack ever could. The security of Zero Trust is intrinsically linked to the strength of its cryptographic primitives.
This realization it feels like the aha moment. The weakness isn't operational, it's philosophical.
It is.
We built our entire digital world on a mathematical assumption that we now know to be false in the quantum era.
It's the ultimate design flaw. And that brings us right back to the strategic implications in that ECS validation we talked about. For these high assurance systems, the solution isn't just fixing a vulnerability, it's architecting a system that removes the vulnerability entirely.
Which requires a rapid, sophisticated shift to what's called post-quantum cryptography, or PQC.
That's the only path forward.
So PQC is the solution, but what is it specifically? I think our audience needs some technical depth here. It's not just a stronger version of RSA, is it?
Absolutely not. That's a common misconception. PQC algorithms are based on entirely different mathematical problems that are considered resistant to both classical and quantum attacks.
And there's a standardization process for this, right?
Yes, the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, has been running a multi-year competition to standardize these algorithms. The selection process has narrowed down the core families.
And what are these main families that we need to be aware of for future deployment?
The three leading candidates are based on very different mathematical foundations. You have lattice-based cryptography, hash-based signatures, and code-based cryptography.
Okay, break this down a bit.
Lattice-based schemes are currently the frontrunners for general encryption and key exchange. They rely on the difficulty of solving certain problems in high-dimensional mathematical lattices. They offer a great balance of performance and versatility.
And the others.
Hash-based signatures, while they're generally limited to digital signatures, not encryption, They provide excellent confidence. Their security relies on the known hardness of cryptographic hash functions, which aren't really sped up much by quantum computers.
So they're a very safe bet for that specific use case.
A very safe bet. And finally, you have code-based cryptography. It can sometimes have larger key sizes, which is a drawback, but it provides a very high level of certainty because it's based on algebraic coding theory, a field that's been well studied and validated for decades.
That technical detail is crucial. So the goal for any strategic organization, a private bank, a G7 infrastructure developer, is to transition all critical systems to these PQC standards before Q-Day.
Yes, and that transition requires something called cryptographic agility, the ability to deploy PQC alongside existing classical standards in a hybrid mode.
So you're running both at the same time.
Exactly. You might encrypt a message using both RSA and a PQC key simultaneously. This ensures the data stays protected, even if the quantum capability arrives unexpectedly early, but it also ensures compatibility with legacy systems until the migration is complete.
The difficulty of that migration, though, it can't be overstated. We're talking about retrofitting the mathematical heart of millions of endpoints, applications, legacy systems.
Systems that were never designed to swap out their cryptographic primitives.
It's a monumental undertaking.
It is, particularly for these highly customized mission-critical systems. But the strategic imperative remains. The only way to minimize that unsolved variable, the timing of Q-Day, is to deploy critical architecture now that is robust against that uncertainty.
So any security professional operating today has to accept that current keys are liabilities.
They are liabilities, and the clock is ticking on the data that has already been collected.
And that takes us directly to the mechanics of that collection. We need to define the threat model that makes Harvest Now, Decrypt Later such an effective and immediate practical exploit.
Let's pull back the curtain.
Okay, let's pull back that curtain on the Harvest Now, Decrypt Later mechanism. This isn't speculative. This is the proven operational model of state-level threat actors. We established it happens in 3 key stages. Let's dive deep into the first 2, which define the immediate exploit happening today.
Right. The success of this model relies on extreme patience, massive resources, and surgical targeting.
So step 1, target identification.
This step involves precise intelligence analysis. Threat actors prioritize their targets based on 2 criteria: the value of the data and its half-life.
So they aren't just doing mass general data breaches.
No, not at all. They are focused on strategic jewels, long-term R&D pipelines, strategic military command structures, core financial settlement data, proprietary blueprints for future technologies. They map out the network topography of G7 entities, advanced R&D firms, and specific private banks, identifying the key systems, encrypting this long-lived data with classical algorithms.
This sounds less like a typical cyber attack and more like a targeted long-term espionage campaign with a specific technological end date.
That's the perfect distinction. It is state-level economic and military espionage, leveraging an inevitable technological advantage.
So step 2 is the core of the immediate threat, data exfiltration. Tell us about the sheer logistical requirements of this phase, which is ongoing right now.
This is where the billions of dollars in state funding really come into play. It begins with establishing persistent, deeply entrenched access inside the target networks.
How do they do that?
Through supply chain compromises, zero-day vulnerabilities, highly skilled infiltration teams. Once they're inside, they launch a continuous, high-volume collection of encrypted traffic and full database backups.
High volume feels like an understatement. We're talking about terabytes, potentially petabytes of highly sensitive, constantly flowing data being copied and shipped out of the network every single day for years.
Exactly. That demands an incredible logistical infrastructure just to handle the exfiltration.
Secure, high-capacity channels that can operate without detection.
Yes. Think of sophisticated tunneling techniques and secure exfiltration channels designed to hide massive data flows within what looks like benign network traffic. They'll often leverage compromised servers or third-party cloud infrastructure as temporary staging points.
And the storage needed for all this. It must be equally immense and highly secured. But why would a threat actor need to secure the archive so heavily if it's just encrypted data they can't even read yet?
Because that archive itself is the ultimate strategic asset. They need hardened, long-term repositories often physically isolated, highly controlled data centers to ensure that collected data remains intact and confidential for perhaps a decade or more.
So they have to protect it from everyone else.
They have to protect it from other intelligence agencies, from internal vulnerabilities, and from accidental loss. It's an investment measured in billions, based solely on the confidence that the quantum decryption capability will arrive.
And that confidence, built on that massive upfront investment, is the clearest indicator of how immediate this threat really is. They wouldn't bother if Q-Day wasn't a certainty in their minds.
Indeed. And this collection effort continues relentlessly, feeding into step 3, storage and waiting. The archive just grows and grows, patiently awaiting the arrival of widespread, fault-tolerant quantum computing. The kind capable of executing Shor's algorithm efficiently on key sizes like ECC 256 or RSA 3072.
Let's discuss the critical window this creates. For a security professional, how do you define the vulnerability period based on this model?
The vulnerability period begins the moment your organization fails to implement TQC. It's that simple. If your data requires 25 years of confidentiality and the predicted Q-Day is 10 years away, your vulnerability period is that 15-year gap where your secret is completely exposed.
So every day you continue to use classical encryption, you are just increasing the size of the harvestable archive for your adversary.
You're feeding the beast.
This means protecting data has to be defined by its entire useful lifetime. If a state secret is produced today, encrypted with RSA, and harvested 5 minutes later, it is permanently compromised.
It is permanently compromised, regardless of how robust your physical or network security is tomorrow. That's the core realization driving the urgency in these high-assurance environments.
The strategic impact is irreversible.
It's irreversible. Once the data is exfiltrated, it's out of the defender's control forever. That puts enormous pressure on key management systems and hardware security modules, HSMs, today. They must be upgraded to support PQC now, not next year.
This persistence of the threat actor, their willingness to invest in massive storage and secure exfiltration over a decade, it really elevates this from just a technological risk to a critical geopolitical risk.
It does.
Which makes quantifying the potential damage not just a good practice, but a necessary survival strategy.
It moves the conversation out of the IT department and into the C-suite and the national security apparatus. They need metrics that reflect the gravity of this long-term retroactive compromise.
So we've established the threat is immediate, the mechanism is harvesting. Now we have to turn this abstract certainty into concrete risk management. The source material demands quantifying the potential for data exfiltration and system compromise. How do organizations move past just theoretical concern?
Well, traditional risk quantification focuses on the immediate financial costs of a breach. Regulatory fines, downtime, remediation costs.
Yeah.
Here we have to introduce 2 strategic metrics that account for this time-delayed systemic failure of cryptography: data sensitivity and data half-life.
Okay, let's detail the metrics for quantifying data exfiltration potential.
Sensitivity is the measure of inherent value, independent of volume. For a military organization, this maps directly to classification levels: confidential, secret, top secret.
And for an enterprise?
For an enterprise, this is defined by intellectual property that drives market cap or competitive advantage. Quantifying sensitivity means assigning a high non-negotiable value to every piece of data that, if it were released in 10 years, would cause maximum strategic or financial damage.
And half-life, the duration of necessary secrecy, that's where the quantum threat makes its direct impact felt.
Exactly. An organization has to triage all its encrypted data based on its required confidentiality lifespan. Does this data need to be secret for 5 years or 20?
Let's take an example.
If you have long-term R&D data that must remain secret for 20 years and your IT systems are still using classical encryption, you can precisely quantify the risk. It's a 100% loss of confidentiality within the next 10 to 15 years based on current Q-Day timelines.
So measuring data exfiltration potential is really calculating the maximum future damage based on the amount of sensitive, long-lived data currently flowing through channels secured by mathematically doomed keys.
It shifts the focus from how many records were exposed to what is the future strategic cost of the intelligence yield we are providing to our adversaries today.
That's a powerful reframing.
It requires organizations to map cryptographic use across their entire mission-critical architecture and correlate it with data classification and retention policies. It's the only way to calculate the maximum potential loss from high-assurance systems like financial clearinghouses or military command centers.
But the threat isn't just data theft. The second part of the mandate is quantifying system compromise. If the encryption keys are exposed, what is the downstream impact on the actual integrity and operation of the infrastructure?
This is where the risk becomes truly existential for high assurance systems. Once the private keys used for digital signatures and authentication are known, an adversary gains the ability to forge trust, both retroactively and prospectively.
Give us a tangible example of what that system compromise looks like in a high-stakes environment.
Okay, consider a global private bank. They utilize digitally signed messages for interbank communications and settlement instructions. If the signing key is compromised, the adversary can, in the future, forge messages. They can retroactively manipulate transaction details, or, and this is critical, they can introduce malicious code that appears to come from a verified, trusted internal entity.
This essentially breaks all of supply chain security.
Completely.
If the key used to sign firmware or critical updates for military infrastructure is compromised, the adversary has a guaranteed route to long-term system failure.
The potential for remote manipulation is immense. It moves from data theft to command and control takeover. For systems that demand that high epistemic certainty score where the assurance level has to be near 100%, this vulnerability is non-negotiable.
Which means the strategic imperative has to be stop operating on unverified assumptions.
That is the new baseline. We have to move away from the assumption that the mathematical barrier will hold long enough.
So what does implementing that strategic imperative look like architecturally for organizations serving G7 NATO or managing core financial services?
It requires a full paradigm shift in how security teams approach development. You have to abandon any security posture built on the assumption that classical cryptography is a permanent solution. This means deploying critical architecture now that addresses the quantum risk exposure.
And what does that include practically?
It includes, number one, immediate PQC implementation, prioritizing the rapid deployment of hybrid PQC solutions to protect any newly created long-lived data.
Okay.
Two, hardening your HSMs, upgrading hardware security modules to support the new, often larger PQC keys and algorithms, ensuring your root of trust is quantum resistant.
Oh, well.
And three, building for cryptographic agility, building high-security WebAssembly and cross-platform architecture solutions that allow for rapid key and algorithm rotation, ensuring they adhere to the strictest global security protocols.
So you're essentially saying that for military and financial sectors, PQC isn't some future patch. It's a compliance necessity today to maintain that high system assurance level.
Exactly. By quantifying the risk, you are justifying the immense cost and complexity of this immediate deployment.
You're moving from asking, can we afford to change our encryption, to stating, we cannot afford the certain strategic loss if we don't change it.
That's the conversation. Protecting your data today is the only way to protect the future integrity and functionality of the systems that run the world.
This has been an incredibly detailed deep dive. It's forced us to look at the quantum threat not as a science problem, but as a current risk management crisis. Let's summarize the key strategic takeaways for our listeners.
Let's do it.
We've fundamentally rewritten the timeline today. The quantum threat isn't distant, it's an active exploit happening now.
First, remember the core strategy. Harvest now, decrypt later. The attack is immediate. Data encrypted today with classical methods is already vulnerable if it has a strategic, long-required half-life. That demands immediate architectural intervention.
Second, the existing cryptographic weaknesses, RSA and ECC, are the Achilles heel today. They are allowing high-volume data exfiltration from the highest stakes sectors, including military, G7 NATO governments, and core financial institutions. This demands an urgent migration to PQC standards.
And finally, the risk is quantifiable. Organizations must measure the potential loss by mapping data sensitivity and its required lifespan, its half-life, against the known quantum timeline. This is absolutely necessary to justify deploying critical architecture that minimizes the unsolved variables in their security posture.
This knowledge is absolutely essential for strategic planning in enterprise and government security. The mandate is clear. Deploy your critical PQC-enabled architecture now. If you are developing mission-critical systems, your security has to anticipate this quantum certainty.
And that leads to a final provocative thought for you, the learner, to consider as you rethink your security strategy. If we accept that cryptographic integrity is failing today due to a future capability, what must be the immediate non-cryptographic security priorities?
That's the pivot, isn't it? If the keys will eventually be broken, then relying on keys alone is a guaranteed failure. we have to prioritize measures that reduce the yield of that harvested data.
Exactly.
We're talking about enforcing zero trust principles, aggressive data segmentation, minimizing data retention to reduce the size of that archive an adversary can build.
And prioritizing system resilience, so that even if an adversary gains a key, the internal attack surface remains minimal.
It forces a total rethink of data value and access control, regardless of when Shore's algorithm becomes a reality.
It forces security to become genuinely future-proof. Thank you for joining us for this crucial deep dive.
We'll catch you next time for more essential knowledge.